Good afternoon, evening, everyone. Welcome to another Jozi.js revival. Fun. Sorry for starting a little bit. Wow, that's very fun. Bit more festive, like even more festive. Welcome everyone for joining us. Sorry we started a bit late. We only have one speaker for you tonight. We're so sorry, but it is the incomparable Rudy. So, without any further ado, with you, Rudy. Did you unmute?
Hi, lovely. I've got the slides now. Should I get into presentation mode? Please do. Okay, look at that. Oh, slides, magic. All right, so few things to mention. I am one of the organizers of Jozi.js together with Rudolph, like here at the back, and Tina's not around, but in spirit, we know that she is. And these are the things that we care about, right? Be nice. We like nice people because the world is full of terrible things. So we want to make sure that we keep it nice, be respectful and constructive. And if there's anything to work together on, let's do that together. Don't know what that is, so let's do it together. And don't be spammy. We might network, connect, share contacts and emails. Let's be very human and not be spammy. Um, these are not the updated slides. But these are one of the wizards missing Rudolph, even though he's amazing. But yeah, old slides. Oh no! Sorry, no. He makes an entrance. Forgive me. He's a wizard. Just like magic, he's there. And we have all of these amazing things, drinks, pizza, because of our sponsor and this place. So thank you to BBB for making this possible. You're amazing. And lastly, we like people sharing content, just like right now. And so if you are learning cool things wherever you are, or doing amazing things, here's a link, connect to that, and do a talk. Trust me, it doesn't have to be crisp. I'm about to talk. You will see it, right? So you don't have to worry how polished, how perfect it is. It doesn't have to be just because you're passionate about something, come and share it with us. Anything that has to do with the web doesn't have to be React. um, just anything, right? Cool. And that's the end of this one. Lovely. And then we can start my presentation because I'm the one that's presenting today. What happens if I did this? Yeah, I guess into presentation mode and something weird happens. So let's not do that. But let's do just present. Beautiful. Like if I have makeup, I look prettier than I do right now. Just joking. My name is Judy. I'm sorry, I keep hitting the mic. And I like presenting. I do this as often as I possibly can. And I talk about everything in the web, all the things that I'm interested in. Doesn't necessarily have to be cool things. What's interesting about today is that I'm really going to challenge you and I really want you to kind of rag me in the ideas that I'm going to share with you. There might be faux as they call it, but like, ride with me in this magical school bus. Right? I am a freelancer by profession, so I work. Thank you so much. The first part of the slides don't necessarily need me to be typing anything, so that's fine. I can hold it. But if you want to charge it right now, it probably would be a good idea. Must I take it off? Thank you very much. All right, we're back. Freelancer. Da 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 da. I work for a sustainable organization based in Norway, trying to reduce plastic waste in the world. I am not a cool person. I'm not gonna say like I work at APC or like cool things like that. Um, but I do shit. Can I say that? Thank you. Love it. And one of the shit that I do is share the things that I like on social media. I have um, fancy myself as a lousy influencer, as you can see, but I like sharing the things that I get to do. And working in different parts of the organizations in the world makes or allows me to work with really cool shit. Right? All right. It's 2024. There is no way you're gonna go to a presentation somewhere without an AI generated image. So this one is mine. All right. I'm wearing a hoodie. Hopefully everyone online can see me. Hi. And it has Mickey Mouse saying shh, basically, with this very dark background. Right. When I bought this, first I did not know it was Mickey Mouse. And so my partner was like, "You do know what that hoodie's about, right?" And I'm like, "No, not really." And he's like, "Well, you should watch this episode on South Park." And I'm like, "Okay, I do not recommend anyone to watch that episode." On the dark side, and I'm sorry that I had to reference that, but I had to kind of make Mickey Mouse our hero again because this South Park episode was villainizing him. So this is my first AI-generated image of the day, and I'm basically trying to make Mickey Mouse our hero. He's slaying bugs and taking names. Oh no, something happened. Where's outside? Can we not do that? Thank you. So he's slaying bugs and taking names. But the idea is that he's unit testing. And how many of you understand and know what unit testing is? By a show of hands. Oh, I love it. So not at all a strange concept. Beautiful. So unit testing is fine for now. I'll come and get it. Okay. Sorry. Like he was showing me if ever I want the non-held mic. That's what I was answering to. Anyway, um, so yeah, unit testing. Unit testing is about this process or this idea of testing a unit of code, like a individual unit of code. So an individual unit of code could be a function, right? Testing that as an isolation. Or like you could be testing things like a function, right? So that is the component that you're going to be testing, and that's what unit testing is all about. But it has a very interesting history. I don't know if ever you care about this, but I care about testing. So I'm just going to tell you anyway, because you're here to listen to me. Unit testing is about, it started around the 1950s, right? And people saw the value of testing parts of code, ensuring that they work in that particular isolation and also work in part, right? And around the 1989, Kent Beck, very cool and famous name around the world, um, went and created something called S-Unit. And he was testing or unit testing a programming language called Smalltalk. And I really think that's a really cool name for like a programming language. Like it's so cool. And after that, it went and was dubbed for JavaScript, right? Oh no, Java, and we called it JUnit. And then so more people started understanding that maybe there's value in ensuring that your code works in part, like ensuring quality at a very small scale. And around the 2000s, something magical happened, and it was called Agile. Remember Agile? I don't know how many people, I don't know the people who are sitting here, how many they understand about Agile, right? But Agile brought amazing things like Scrum Master certification. Does anyone know what that is? Like, we have so many youngins here. I feel like these are good jokes, just not landing. Joking. So they brought about Scrum certification. They brought about this very nice exam question. So I'm quite old. This is why, like, maybe I share these things. I'm quite old. And one of the exam questions you would get is the Agile Manifesto, right? It would say something like, wow, we put value, or we understand and think that the things on the left are important. We value the things on the right more. And then it'll talk about like collaboration over intensive documentation. I don't know why I remember that, but it's scorched into my brain. And that would be one of the exam questions. Now, agile is not the problem, people are, right? The idea of agile is instead of we're moving away from this waterfall approach, this waterfall idea, this waterfall thinking, right, of building things somewhere in a basement with all the features and calling and summoning everybody over the weekend, Saturday, somewhere, that they now need to deploy this list of features and expect nothing to happen. Right? Agile is all about being very open to change because that will naturally happen during the process of developing a project, right? And this is why unit testing became a big thing because we needed to know that while we're adapting to these changes, the features and the code that we have actually work like they're supposed to. Awesome. So that was a really long speech about unit testing. Okay. Now, if you use any of these frameworks, excuse me, Angular is not on the screen, not because I don't care and I don't like it. Wait. Not really. They just did not have a cool icon. You see how cool these icons are? I was building these slides on Canva, and like you can just search for frameworks. And they didn't have React on these cool icons. So it's not here because I don't like it. It just did not have a cool icon. But anyway, if you're using any of these frameworks, you're probably not necessarily looking at a unit in terms of how object-oriented programming would normally think about unit testing, right? So the things like JUnit, maybe SUnit, never worked on Smalltalk. Oh, no, actually, it is an object-oriented programming. They have like these classes, right? And then you test the functions within those classes. So the object under test is this class. With components, it might not be very easy to visualize that this is also like an object, right? Because like our these frameworks would use like a function with multiple things within that function and doing all of those things, right? So when you think about units, you think, why would I test this particular function? Because you are thinking about components, you're thinking about an input, you're thinking about a button, you're thinking about all these things. And I'm telling you this because, as she said, Lowe's, I was introduced to this lady, a very cool lady. Her name is Sandi Metz, and here in 2023, she talks about how to unit test. And her aim is, sorry? Yes, yes. It was a Rails conference. I'm sorry. Know that this is the web. But she talks about how you're going to test these units, right? She talks about how to make your testing thorough, stable, fewer, and faster. And I am so glad that there's a lot of upcoming engineers right now because testing should be moved front of coding, and you need to start doing it before you code TDD. And I know that's controversial for a lot of people, but like testing is so valuable in your UI. Anyway, she talks about this and then she applies it purely to objects like this OOP framework, right? And my task today is to help or translate this talk to components. I do that when I code, but I don't know if some of the examples that I have are going to track. So your responsibility today is to make sure that this nonsense I'm about to say makes sense. And hopefully you can identify it and hopefully you can apply it in the future. Cool. So how many of you have ever seen this diagram? Oh, I love it. Oh, I love that. Okay, cool. So our job is going to be filling out this diagram. But instead of thinking about unit testing and these objects, we're going to be applying that for components in the front end. And I think there's some distinct differences, but maybe not. Maybe there is, maybe there's not. So me and you are going to work together to figure out that. Okay. So just come back to thinking about components, right? You will have a typical component looking like this. A parent component, that's a header, and has a child component that is a navigation component, and another one that maybe is a button that maybe opens up a dialog of a like login screen, and you put in your credentials and you click on a button. Typically, these child components would report back to the parent component if ever like the parent component did something with that input, right? So there's data coming in, there's data flowing out. And yeah, so you would typically see something like this. Sandi Metz talks about the concept of messages, right? Messages, as I just made an example right now, coming into the component, coming into the object, messages within the component or within the object, messages going out from the component or, yeah, the object. And one of those messages, they have the example that I just showed you, an origin, right? So she talks about incoming messages. Incoming messages, messages coming from outside the world into the component under test. Either object, component, and my colors are blown out, but it's okay. Messages coming in. Typical example, let's say that we have an object called a math object. And that math object has like an add function. So an incoming message to that could be adding the two numbers, right? So you pass in two numbers that I want to add, and you're passing it into this object, which is a math class that has an add function. It's from the outside world into this component. A component example of this could be logging in, right? You put in a username, you put in a password, and you click the button. That's a message outside the world coming into the component. So that's an example of an incoming component. An outgoing component is from the object under test into the outside world. Typical example, using our math example, is if the adding was saving to a database. So after I've added this button, I want to save to the database, so I'm calling something that's going to save to the database from the component that's under test to the outside world. Typical example for a login, for example, if you've got credentials, username, password, we want to see if ever this is actually a user we have in our database. You call the database to check if ever that user is a user that we have. So it's moving from the object under test outside. A component internally, so a self-to-self call or self-to-self message could be if you are putting two numbers that you need to add, the function might be calling a private function to check if ever the numbers that you're passing in are indeed strings, right? We don't want to add integers. We don't want to add strings, right? So it could be a validation function of some sort that basically checks that, oh, am I having, have I been passed numbers, right? And for logging in, same example, you'd want to validate the email address. So let's say no email address was passed, or an email address that's kind of off was passed. This component could be actually calling a private message that validates this email. So that's a self-to-self message. So first column of our table, messages. Origin, it could be incoming, self-to-self, or outgoing. And then she talks about the types of messages that you can have. You can have two types. A query message, meaning that you're asking something and you're expecting a value in return. That's a query message. And a command is that you are sending the message. It causes a side effect somewhere in the world, like deleting a value in the database where your entire application still relies on this database, things like that. But it's typically like it's hard to separate a query and a command. It's hard to separate a query from a command. Sometimes the messages that we send could be a query, they return something, but could be a command, they cause a side effect somewhere. So the line, as you see there, very thin. So then we've got the top row of our diagram, query messages, and commands. Now, I am using these as an example. I am not married to the framework, so you can use or replace this with any framework that you like. I would insist on the testing library because I think it's a really good framework for testing our components, a cool library. So most of the example as well are going to be coming from there. So yeah, replace Next.js with whatever, keep testing library. Now, second AI image of the day. This was hard. See how weird that table looks? Like, there's a lot of people who actually who are prompt engineers, and I'm not one of them. And I tried to get Mickey Mouse to space while being a teacher and a superhero, but showing a table. And that table looks wonky. Anyway, we're going to try and fill out the table, and this is the idea of this. The first part that we're going to be talking about is an incoming query message, right? From the outside to the inside of our component, we want a return from this request, and it shouldn't have any side effect, right? Because it's a query, right? A typical example, we are going to be using logging in. Ooh, I wish that was a lot bigger. Is it possible to make this a lot bigger? Hi, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. All right. So a typical example of this is when a user logs in, right? That child and parent component that I was telling you about is that if I'm logging in, I go to the database, and if this person is an authenticated user, I get the object of the user back. And I need to tell the parent component, if it cares, that I now have this user and this user is authenticated, right? And typically what you would do in your parent component is that if the user is logged in, then maybe I redirect them to the account page, or I change the header, right? Because headers would typically have sign in or log in and all of those things. But as soon as a user is authenticated, that changes because it doesn't make sense to ask a user that's already logged in to log in. So you'd want to either redirect them to a particular page or change the header altogether to show things that are tailored to the user that just logged in. So here, React. When you want to let, or Next.js in this case, when you want to let the parent component know that, hey, I've done some cool stuff and you care about this shit, so here it is they pass in a function like you see in handle login, and I have a function there called on login. The internal component will do something like this and say, hey, here's a login that is a prop, and I'm going to pass authorize as equals to true. And in the parent component, I'll be doing something like this and say, hey, are you authorized? If you are, then go to the account page, right? So this is one of the things that you can do. How you should test it according to Sandi Metz is like this. This is a query, so we care about the result. So if that's the case, then we assert the result, right? Nothing else, just the result that comes from the component. So here, I'm marking the handle hook at the top. And then here, I have an expect that says, check that I've called this function with the thing that it expects. And the rule is test the interface and not the implementation. Treat the component of login as a black box. Sandi Metz uses, what is this, like a capsule, yeah, in space, because you don't want things coming in because they're going to disrupt the space of that capsule and all of those things. So you have to treat it like, do your thing, but I care about the result. And that's our first rule. If it's incoming and it's a query, assert the result. Second one, okay. I included this because I thought I would be really nervous and I would need to breathe. So give me a second. I can do this in a live stream, right? Thank you. All right. So the second part is incoming command. Right? Again, quick reminder, a command, we call it, causes a side effect, but we don't have anything in return. So we don't care about the result, right? And this is one of the examples that I have. So if the command is that I send username and password and I click a button, and the side effect is that I go into the database and get my user, this user is probably used somewhere in my application, right? I don't want to go in each and every page and log in, get the data, right? And in our frameworks, we usually do this by something called global state, right? So once I get this user, I take this object and I populate it on some context somewhere. So I have a provider that wraps my component and does something, if you know anything about how React works. It's a lot of work. And so I get the value that I'm looking for in the database, take that response, which is what I'm doing there at the bottom, and I set it into some context that I have, this is going to cause a side effect if I change my initial way of how I'm doing this in the header. So just a reminder, this is the header. And here I now have a use effect that listens on an is authorized value. If the user is authorized, which I can only get after the user has been successfully authenticated, and I check if ever that thing has been populated, and I then redirect to the account page. Sandi Metz says I must test this like this. There is a propensity to want to test this in the login component, but if it's an incoming command, you assert the side effect. And if my side effect is the fact that I now have something in my context that I rely on in the rest of my application, then I want to assert what it does after, right? So I render my header, do all the login things, and then I assert that indeed my path name contains the endpoint that I want to go to, which in this case is account, right? So the previous test was actually in the login space, but this one is somewhere outside where the actual side effect is actually happening, right? And then I have another example. Now this one, I thought about it for a very long time. Like I think I changed my mind like 3 or 4 times about this. And so like, keep an open eye and let me know if it makes sense. All right. So one of the other things that you can have in a side effect for a login component is that, and this is very front end related, is that when you put in the credential and you have no email address, for example, or really like incorrectly formatted email address, what you would typically do in your component is validate that email address and then show an error message underneath the input, right? You'll be like, hey, user, your credentials are not, or like your email is not in the right place. And I want to assert that in my front end, right? I need to make sure that that side effect reflects to my front end so my users can actually see this all the time. And I'll tell you why I had a struggle with this, because when you are validating a message, unless the validation function that you're using is used anywhere in your application, it's probably a private function that's actually validating. And you'll see why I had a struggle with this a little bit later on. But I chose that. It is a side effect. And because it changes my interface, I want to be able to test it. And it is an incoming message from the outside, so it should be valid. We can talk about it later on. So, incoming command messages assert the direct public side effect. And as we saw, sometimes we can test it in the component that's currently running, but Sandi Metz also mentioned that it is the responsibility of the directly affected class that will actually get the assert, whatever that means to you. All right. No. So the other one, the third one, is a self-to-self. And this talks about what I just talked about right now. A self-to-self message, like we heard as an example earlier on, was the fact that if you've got 2 numbers, you might be calling a private function to validate if ever those 2 numbers are actually integers. It's not useful anywhere in the component, so it's private to this particular object, right? Same thing with passing in an email and a password and clicking a button, is that if I'm validating an email and it's nowhere else and I've created that function privately inside my component, then, it's a self-to-self. The component is calling another function within itself. So the example, if I've got a function, say, is email valid? There's my private function there. I'm saying, is email valid? Maybe they pass in an empty and I return a false, right? It's a query message. So it's an internal message and I rely on the returned value of that thing because it's a query, right? That's where we are here, the query. So what's happening here is that it will return a value, and based on that, I'll be doing something. A well-intending, hard-working software developer would do something like this, right? Try to make the function private so that they will be able to test if indeed do we call the validating function, right? Because it's doing things. It's telling us whether the email address is valid or not. Surely I should be testing it. Sandi Metz says no. If you have a query that's internal, so a self-to-self message, that's a query, you do not test it. And I understand that because If I am asserting values that are incoming, like the first block that we had, and I've asserted the result, or the other one, I've asserted the side effect, chances are, during that entire process, I'm kind of testing the validation of my email, right? Because I wouldn't be getting either of these two in a positive use case, right? Because the example that I just used is only like the positive use case of things. Um, I won't get there unless my email is valid. And when we test something, we don't only test the positive case of it, we also test the negative. Meaning that if I test the negative, and I'm trying to assert the result for my component, one of the things I would assert is that, am I getting an error? Is my user authenticated? What kind of errors am I getting? Right? So don't do things like this. If it's a private function, leave it private. Chances are, you are asserting or testing that functionality in some way or some way. English. That, right? You're testing it. So she says not do it. And then the other one was a self to self that is a command, right? A reminder of what command is. I send a message. Don't care about the result, but it causes a side effect. Now, what kind of message in login would do something as wild as that? Did I have an example? Yes, I did. Okay, cool. So I have a function, right? A side effect is that this thing is going to cause havoc in the world, like adding a product or logging in a user, right? Like when that thing happens, my application will not behave the same because someone either cares about this item that I've added to the database or either cares that this user is logged in, right? So a private function that causes a side effect could look something like this. I do actually send a message, right, somewhere in fetch that is going to go to the database and find my user. But I've wrapped it into this nice function of mine called call the endpoint, right? And I'm passing in the email address and I'm waiting for the response and doing more side effect things. So I think that was a good example of a self to self, right? Another one I could think of was like actually calling the state function maybe set context or set is loading, right? Another thing that we do when we go and fetch component is set like an is loading state so that we can show a loader or things like that. But there's no way to actually get access to those set methods from state, which is, thank goodness, we can't because we shouldn't be testing that. But so this was the closest I can get to mimicking something that is self to self and causes a side effect. So again, well-intending, hardworking, 60 hours a day engineer would be trying to do something like this, making that function private and asserting that that function has been called. It's cool. You know how to do is to be called. Like we get it, but you shouldn't be doing it on things that you should not be doing it. And Sandi Metz says if it's a self-to-self function and it's a command type of message, just don't test it. And again, same thing applies. The thing that this thing is going to do is tie us to the implementation of these functions. If you start testing private functions, you are testing the implementation of the component. You're not testing what the component is doing, and therefore tightly coupling your test to how the thing is implemented. And what that's going to do for you is that you start getting those random test failures. Like, my test failed, but I really don't understand why. Because you're probably testing things that you shouldn't be testing. Not all the time, right? Like, these are rules. Rules are meant to be broken, and that's okay. But when things like that start happening, either ask yourself, am I setting too much state in this component? Should I break it down into other things so that it's easy for me to test it in components? But you kind of don't want, we want thorough, stable, fewer, and faster tests. And this is one of the ways that we can get them. Okay. I think I've talked at GDG, and this gentleman asked me about, I think, GitHub workers. And I recently did something, and I'm telling him about how the cell works and all these things. I almost fainted. Like, I just forgot to breathe. And it's like the weirdest thing, because you think that your body would like remind you, like, hey, dude, you're not breathing. And like, I just stopped and I just was like, I want to explain this to you desperately. Like, you should know this. And yeah. So in the future, I'm trying to insert more of these so that I don't pass out. Okay. So the other part is an outgoing query message. Reminder on query message, I call it, I care about the return. And if it's outgoing, it's from my component to the rest of the world. So like adding that sum to the database, it's from the particular function, so add sum function to the rest of the world. Same with logging in. So I thought of an example like this. Remember that regex? I've coded for such a long time. There's this email regex that is somewhere in the internet that we all copy when we're trying to validate our email address. So let's say that you were really so kind to not put this directly in your code and created a function called is email like format checker or something like that. And you pass it in an email and it formats your email or checks that your email is in the correct format. It's not internal to the component. Surely I should be able to test it because my component should be able to, make sure that it calls it, right? It doesn't live, if I'm not supposed to test self to self, surely I need to test these. So it will be easy to do something like this. Mock the function, say that it returns true, and assert that it's a truthy value, and assert that I've called the function. Sandi Metz says don't do that. Just don't do it. And the reason is because if I'm passing in an incorrect email address, wait, did I do it here? No, I actually passed a valid one. But if I pass like a D or anything like that, like it's either asserted in some shape or form through my other processes, right? So if I'm actually asserting that I'm showing an error message on my input, I'm inherently testing this if I pass it like a D as an input or like an invalid email address. I am asserting this if ever I actually don't wind up in the account page as well, right? So in all the other assertions at the top, here, I'm actually also asserting the formatting function that I've inherited somewhere in my application. So you don't have to do things like this because it's already tested. Again, if an AI version of that regex statement that we are using, and now I want to use the AI version and call this API to check if ever my email is validated, this test is going to break because you've tried to test to the implementation uh, of this particular function, right? It leaves somewhere in the application you're trying to test it directly when you shouldn't. So if ever you change your mind and wanted to do something different, this is going to fail. Okay, so like, don't panic. We are going to test that. Okay, the last part is outgoing command. An example of an outgoing command, it's from the component that we're trying to test to the rest of the world, right? And it causes a side effect. So calling this function causes a side effect. Yeah. So this is a typical example of the fetch. In the other one, I did use a function to test against, but you can also call it directly like this. Or like the implementation could look something like this, right? It's a fetch. I'm passing you the email address. I want to check if ever this user is logged in. And we test this like this. If you have an incoming command, you expect that you have sent the data. So if it's a command, remember, we don't care about the return, but we do care that it causes or does some side effect. We do care that we ensure the side effect happens because that's what a command does, right? I call you, the command, it does some stuff. So the thing I'm going to assert here is just create a mock of the function responsible to call the endpoint or endpoint itself, and then ensure that you have sent. So has been called with the data that you expect. Because it's a command, I need to make sure that I have sent the credentials for you to do the things that you need to do. So the final diagram. If it's an outgoing command, expect to have sent the message. These are just rules, right? Not hard, fast, or yeah. And they can be broken if you feel like there's a reason for you to do it. But I feel like it's a very solid way to kind of always think whether or not should I be testing this? Is it inherently tested in some shape or form? In my process. And in this case, maybe you could write fewer. thorough and stable test. Are you with me? Does that make sense? Cool. Do I still have time to continue? Oh, wait, let me say this. When you laugh, what do you mean? Can I do a thing? Sorry, can I continue, folks, with the show of hands? Lovely. Do you want a break? No? Okay. Sorry. You can go take a break if you want. All right. Hi, folks online. With the people. Okay. So, I decided that I'm going to do something I'm probably going to run away from doing. But I'm going to do it anyway because, hey, I'm having fun. Hope you are too. Um, you're not? Okay. Wasn't that a forced? Okay. So again, let's visit the idea of components. This is a single product component. I've got a parent component that is like all of the products, right? So you typically see this in an e-commerce website, and it will list different types of components, and it's probably calling a database somewhere, getting all the products that you have in your inventory, and then displaying it, right? Now, I know this is 4,000, and you probably think I'm crazy, but I took this image on DisneyClassic.net, and there's only one of these things that actually exists, and it's going for $223. I don't know why, but people who care about these things pay for these things, and that's okay because it's fun to have these things, I guess. So when I try to convert it, it came about 3,800 or so closer to 4,000. So that's not a joke. That's actually how much it's going for. But anyway, if you see, this is like a typical component you would have for a single product component. Mickey Mouse, green stock figurine for 4,000. It has the picture of the product and the add button. And this is probably the part where I need to be hands-free, like you. Testing. All right. So I haven't done this in a very long time. So this is going to be either really spectacularly, fabulously terrible, or it's going to be great. All right. So we should be able to see everything, right? There's going to be a lot of stuff running at the bottom. Don't really mind about it until I say something about it. Okay. So I would take, after we fetch information in the database of all the list of products that we have, right? I'd expect that if I'm passing information up with the name, the price, as well as maybe the image, that's an incoming command message. And the reason why it's a command message is that it causes a side effect, but that the parent component, which is the all product component, doesn't care about the returned object, right? There's nothing that it's specifically waiting for the single product component to do for it to actually make a decision. It's just saying, I'm giving you this data, show it. So as a single product component, I'm going to be like, oh, it's a value. I need to show these values, type of a thing. So for me, it's an incoming command. And our rules say, test the public side effect, right? And that's what we're going to do. Now we're going to do it very TDD style. I read the meetup description of the talk, and I was like, yo, I saw this. But it was I'm not gonna be able to do this, but let's try. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So TDD says 4 things, right? We like to always highlight the other 3 things, that the red, green, reflector part of it, right? But the first thing it actually tells us, and this is why for me testing is not just a byproduct or a side effect of the thing that you do after you've built the components. It basically helps you think about the solution you're about to build. So the first step of TDD is highlighting how you want to solve the problem. And that's what we're going to do. And how you do that if I knew how to type, right? Create a describe. Let's say that we are testing our product, right? And if I do this, this is how you do it, right? Create to-dos that highlight what you want to do. First thing that you want to do, single component. What do you want to show? If the side effect is that I have all these details, I probably want to check if does my component actually show the name, the price, and the image, right? So let's say should show product details, right? The other thing that I probably wanted to do is, I don't know, if I click on the add button, this should be adding this to some database of this user somewhere, right? So they probably have a card and doing all these things. So should call, let's say enter. Terrible, yeah. Good practices. Let's find a good name for this. Should add product. Right. And then the last one I thought of, and I think it lands itself because it's really not actually a self-to-self, is that if the product is out of stock, maybe I want to show some indication that the product is actually out of stock. So, keep facing people nodding. So let's try to do that. Okay, I can how to do my shortcut. There you go, there you go. Okay. Should disable the button. All right. Can any other person think of anything that we can test in this component? Oh wait, should I make this a lot bigger? Cool. Can anybody see? I can't think of anything to test. I think if I'm looking at the single product component, that kind of covers the things that I want to test. If you think of something, let me know. Cool? All right. So in my case, I've now spent the time and the energy thinking about how I'm going to solve this problem. And I haven't even coded a line of like actual code to do this. Right? And I continue to do so. Let's start with the first one. So there's a sound. Why is there sound? There's a sound in my computer. If it's not disrupting, there's a feedback on my side. That's so weird. It just also just randomly started. Oh. Oh, thank you so much. Cool. Then we want to probably render our component. This is our product component. The product component is sitting over here. All right. We want product. We want to stop it here. Let's start like this. And one of the things that I typically do, and I especially dislike this, is that people would do something like this. All right. Well, like you can do it. Sorry. I think the word I should use. My least favorite way to assert this is this. Container, right? And then they do something like expect this container to have snap. Can I do it? Something like this. So it's like product details. I just want to check the snapshot. This is currently failing because we don't have the product components. So I probably should also do something like this so that it fails real time. So this probably tells us that product doesn't exist. There's like an error down there if you can't see it. Fine, let's go and create our component. Product. Now I've got product, probably need to import it. Can't do that. We have it now. And our test is green, right? But how is that? Why is our test green? Like, we just snapshot and everything was fine, everything was great, but how is that even possible, right? If I slide in here, you see that there's a snapshot. and like it has this empty div. And what the test is basically saying is that I've got a snapshot and some crappy things in it, but I'm fine, I'm happy. TDD is supposed to be able to also lead you as an engineer, right? Help you figure out what is the next step that I need to do. And this is the rig to me part of it, and this is what I just shared with you, right? Like I started writing a component and it started being red because I didn't have the component. And people want to be like, oh, but I want to build a component first. Not really, right? Because like this is supposed to be a guiding thing as you go. Cool? So the other very cool thing that we would do is expect mean. Oh dear. Screen content. That thing. And then we say get by text. Right? I'm looking for some text in my component, right? I think, let's say, Mickey, right? And expect to be in document, right? So we can move away from this. We agree that this is trash, so we take it away. Agree that this is trash, take it away. And then I close this again, come back to the context. Now, we talked about the parent component passing information to this out component. Right now, we are not doing any of that. And so, again, what's cool about TDD is that I can decide, am I going to pass name, type, all of those things in isolation, or I can pass an object that has all the information. I favor the object to each their poison. So we're going to do product details, and we're going to have some objects here. So I'm going to define it at the top, called product details, and our product detail will have name, Mickey, string, Mickey. Cool, we've got 4,000, and we'll probably have image. So image, and we say that in asterisk, Mickey, right? So in my product, we'll pass that to our component here. And then this helps the next part a little bit easy because I don't have to now rely on this random object. I can do something like product details dot name. And I expect that to be in the document. Now my test should be failing, telling me that it can't find that. So it says that I'm able to find an element with text Mickey. That's true because our component has none of that. So let's change that. So we return that. Probably put this in a nice div. And then we want name. But we don't have name. So we're going to just structure product details. Sorry, I'm not using TypeScript. You'll be okay. Something like that. Okay. Passes. What? Test passes, right? And if you see here, if you also don't have to discuss this container anymore, do that. If you look at that, I am asserting the right value, right? It's in my div. But is there really the right semantic thing for this component? Like, I have a text in the abyss at this point in time because this value says nothing about this component, right? But my text passes because I'm doing things like this, right? I'm saying stream, get by text, and I'm checking it. It's gonna pass. It's like, it's getting the value in the component. But says nothing and puts no meaning to my component. Another thing that it does is that if I went and made that div, I don't know, display none or visible hidden, this will also still pass. Does anyone know why? Oh, they know why. And I hear that, right? So the assertion that we are making here is whether or not this thing is in the DOM. And it will be in the DOM, but it could potentially not be visible, right? So I don't necessarily favor this. And this is the thing that it will keep making this pass, even though it's not valid, right? well, if there is some form of like hidden ability into this div. So the next thing that you probably want to do, and always favor this if ever that component has to make something visible, is to do something like this. Shouldn't change our test in any way, right? So it still passes, but we know that our component, not only is it the electricity did a thing, right? Okay, cool. Right? Like, because it really is there and it's really not hidden, right? But we know that it's not telling us anything about this. So my favorite thing to do first is this. Always choose roles. And the reason why that's the case, so if you see anything that's I've put it there, is that it gives me all of the semantically available roles in my HTML. Meaning that not only am I asserting that the value is there, or getting the value that is actually there, I'm also getting it from the right HTML tag, right? Always favor roles until you can't anymore. And when you can't, ask yourself why. Because what it also ensures is that you are accessible, meaning that when something is reading your application, it can distinguish that this thing actually means a paragraph, this thing means a header, this thing is an actual button, because we have this tendencies of making divs to be buttons and putting a click event in it. We shouldn't do that. Save the Arial roles of the world. Like, you don't need this. So I have chosen that this could be a paragraph. And there's a role for this. I don't know if ever it was originally there in Second Library. I feel like paragraph as a role was not there, but that's just maybe my very naive way of thinking about this, right? Um, anyway, and this could be like a, not necessarily a header, because it probably won't be the most important thing on my page. But anyway, if I change this now to a paragraph, sorry, right, this should still pop. But why? Because I'm not actually asserting any of the things that I want to assert, right? We are doing this to assert product detail that is showing on the page. But I just got my role and I checked that it's visible and the paragraph is visible. But I actually did not assert what was going on. So the mistake that we would typically do, right? So one thing to change is to have text. Oh, okay, yeah, perfect, right? Product details, dot name, and I can do something like this. Now my text passed for all the right reasons because I now have the actual text and I'm asserting that text, right? Cool. So always use the right assertion, matcher for the use case that you're trying to do. Cool with me. Carry on. This is should show product details, right? And name is not the all product details that we want. So let's assert and expect something else. And the next thing that we want to assert is price. Our test failed. Does anyone know why? Doesn't exist on the other side. Perfect. Let's add it. Okay, probably do that. Do that. That's definite. Yeah. Where are you? Where are you? Here. Here. Got a price. And let's extract the price. My test still failed. Does anyone know now why it failed? Still have, yeah, you can see the HTML there. I've got the, can I make it bigger? No. I can, but I'm so sorry I can't. There's no different stuff. Wow, that's hard. Right. Believe you me, there's HTML that shows that the price is there. 4,000 Rand and Mickey. But it still failed. And it failed on the first one, which was fine a minute ago. Mm. Beautifully said. There's two paragraphs. Like, how does it decide which one it is? Right? Another parameter that you get with get role is passing in extra options like name, right? So we can have a name for our paragraph, being name, and then we can have a name for this one and call it type. This will obviously fail because what is the value for a paragraph so that it has name? HTML helps us with this. Title, we call this type. And our test is passed again. Lovely. Last one, like our product is only going to have one image. So we're going to make our lives a little bit easy. And to our surprise, there's a role for image, always choose role. And then we can change this to be visible. This should fail, and then we insert an image. All right, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this, let's do image, let's do cool, image. Sorry, and our test part, right? We've got image, we assert that image is there. Now, for me, if I'm reviewing a code, this is a code smell, right? Testing could be really complex. This is just a simple test, but you could really get complex tests. If you've got 3 expects and something fails, you're not sure actually what failed. I might be trying to fix the last one, but the other one is a problem, right? And people do forget that writing tests is also code too. So let's refactor, right? Not a favor of always putting before all because that is also, or before each is like testing that is an infestation of bugs. But you can try to scope this as much as you possibly can. Do something like this. No, we don't want that described. I recently found this extension that kind of makes my life easy. And as I think about that, you can also do what I'm doing using AI. So let's say should show product details, right? Product details. And in here, we want to put this in here, right? It kind of composes what we are about to refactor. And then we can make another one and another one. We're going to assert that we've got name here. We're going to remove this. We're going to assert that we've got price here. Remove this and this. Wow. Right? And then assert that we've got image and remove this too. Now our test looks like this. If I collapse this and I wanted to focus on something else, then everything is in this composed space. And if I have a text there, it's very specific in the messaging. It's not just all the product details in the world, but it's also specific and composed. Next one. Okay, so our function is like should add product to cart. Now, if I'm adding a product to cart and clicking a button, that's not really an incoming message. But it is a function from the component to the outside of the component. And what the rule says is expect results, expect things to have been changed. So that's what you're going to do. No. Let's say this comes from product. We're going to discover what that looks like in a bit. And we have add product. And we're going to use n to mark that. Then we want something that we can actually search. So let's do something like mark, add product. Ooh, no. Mark, check. Mark, and I want to have add product. Yep. So before this, I did add function, add product. That comes from that. All the bottles falling. Cool. We remove this to do from this function. and we start implementing our test. So we want the render, we want product. Okay, I'm going to copy this from somewhere quickly. The first, this, close it here, and then add it here. Cool. And it needs to click a button, so always. Next lesson that we're going to do. One of the examples that you see in the web is fire events. Fire event is a good way for you to actually fix that something is happening into your components. But the creators of testing library are now favoring that you do a user event. Yes. So if you want anything to happen to your component, user event dot click, and we want sprint dot get by role. Always get by role because we do have a button, right? And that's complaining because we are not going to async there, and it's just complaining because we don't have a button. That's all good. And what we want is to expect that this mark, not there anyway, mark product to have been called with this object. So let's do product details dot name and price. Product details dot price. Right? So I want to make sure that this thing, as an outgoing message, has went to the world to cause the side effect we all so love, right? And now it's failing because we don't have a button. So let's create a button. Button. No. Right? I always get this wrong. Look at me. Let's do that. And then we're going to get an on-click event. On add product. Cool. And then we're going to create a function just here at the top. On add product. And this is going to be a function internal to our component, but we don't mind because that's not what we're testing. We're just testing something we call the rest of the world. Now, I can try to be fancy and put a type text statement here, but that's just a simple function that I'm going to call, which is add product, product, and then we can do something with that response. Oops, sorry. On that. Right, that's the function that we want to call. Cool. Figure out what we're complaining about now. Sorry. Whoa. I know. I thought it would be running as I'm doing it, but it's not. So, like, go figure. Right? Okay. So now we need name from this function of ours. Name. And this comes from that. And twice. This comes from that. So that's still going to fail. What is my problem, though? The trick. I heard someone say the trick. Yes. Say that again. Line 43, yes. Not really, because this trick that I'm referring to is the on trick that's happening here. Straight up? Does anyone know? Let's figure it out. Add product is not defined. Add product, add product. Let's go to the add product. Ah, that's true, because we have not imported our component. So let's do that again. Come on. It's done. Thank you, Rudolph. Cool. So now we've asserted that we actually have called product, and we called it with the details that we have, which we are also passing earlier. Great attempt. Thank you. Both James and thank you. Cool. Last one. Check if ever the function is or the button is disabled. All right. Render as we normally would. But now we need to change something. Right? If we introduce something maybe called quantity to QT to determine if ever the product is actually out of stock, and let's give it a number. At first, we're just going to start with 2, but if ever we wanted to change that, we can do something like this. Say product equals that, and then red our product and try to change quantity to 0. Wow. Cool. And instead of passing the product, we're going to pass in that. And the reason why I said that is because we're going to have some logic to say that if the product is 0, right? Last one. Almost done. We're going to expect people would typically do something like read dot get spiral, which is going to be a con, right? And do something like dot disable to be true, right? This will perfectly work because this button is going to be disabled, and we'll have some disable functionality here that does something. But if we want to be able to use the right matches, so if you say to be disabled, would pretty much be the same thing. Cool. And this is how we ensure thorough, stable, pure, and cluster test. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Thank you. Oh, that's so nice. I know that I've taken most of your time, but if you got questions or anything, text me. But let's eat. Let's talk after this. Do you want to do it now? People want to talk. People want to eat, and they want to...
Oh, hello. I was just curious about.
Okay, fine. I'm going to answer questions, but you can eat.
Oh yeah, I was just curious about that last sentence. So meaning that if it's disabled in terms of it's going to disable the whole entire, like let's say you have like 100 products. If they run out, it's going to disable it. So you have to test that as well, like the way the functionality works.
So it depends on how you want to implement it. So the one that I chose that's only disabling the button of that single component. So meaning that if the outside world has multiple products and all the like 2 out of the 3 products, for example, that have quantity 0, then only 2 of the products will have a disabled state. And if the question is, would you test that as well? I would, but I will not test it in a single component. I'll test it outside, right? And this is another talk that I actually want to do, is that you can testing libraries terrible at creating meshes that are made out of food. So it's like an all products versus actually a list of products. And in that case, I would want to check if I'm passing in 5 and 2 other products actually disabled, are they indeed disabled, right? But testing library would need to go through all of those and actually check for that. But it doesn't have a really good method to do. Does that answer what you're saying?
Yeah.
I'm terrible at doing this. Thank you. Any more questions? Let's eat.
Let's eat. People online, thank you so much for joining us. See you next time.